The morning she found out she was pregnant, Mara burned the eggs. She didn't notice until the smoke alarm went off. She was standing in the kitchen of their apartment on Creekside Drive, holding the little white stick with both hands, staring at it like it might change its mind. The alarm screamed. She set the stick on the counter, turned off the burner, opened the window above the sink, and stood there, fanning the smoke out with a dish towel, laughing and crying at the same time. The eggs were completely black. She didn't care even a little bit. She'd been trying to find the right moment to tell Felix for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of tucking the secret into her chest every morning, carrying it through her shifts at the hospital, bringing it home at night, and setting it beside her on the pillow like something fragile. She was a labor and delivery nurse. She'd held hundreds of women's hands through the hardest and most beautiful moments of their lives. She knew exactly what was happening inside her own body, and still, she couldn't quite make herself believe it was real. That evening, Felix came home with takeout from the Thai place on Monroe Street, her favorite, which he remembered even on the ordinary nights, and that was one of the things she loved about him. He set the bags on the table, shrugged off his jacket, and was halfway to the couch when she held up the little stick. He went completely still. Then he crossed the room in 4 steps and picked her up off the floor, laughing into her hair, and she felt the secret finally leave her chest and become something that belonged to both of them. They told her parents the following Sunday. Her mom, Deb, cried before Mara even finished the sentence. Her dad, Carl, reached across the dinner table and gripped Felix's shoulder without a word, the way men who don't know how to say things will sometimes say everything with their hands. It was a good evening. There was peach cobbler. Her mother sent them home with leftovers and a bag of baby clothes she had apparently been storing in the attic for years, just in case. Because that was the kind of woman Deb was. The kind who prepares for joy. Mara was 31. She had worked hard for her life. She had a job she was proud of, a man she trusted, a family that would show up. She lay in bed that night with her hand over her stomach and thought, okay, this is it. This is what everything was leading to. She should have known better than to think like that. Felix worked in commercial real estate. Long hours, client dinners, weekend site visits. Mara had understood that about him from the beginning, had decided early on that she could live with a man who was ambitious and often distracted. Because when he was present, he was really present. She believed that. She had evidence for it. Their whole relationship was built on the evidence she had collected over 4 years. The remembered food orders, the way he turned his phone face down when they were eating together, the time he drove 2 hours in a snowstorm, because she'd called him crying and couldn't explain why. So she noticed, but didn't name it, when he started leaving earlier and coming home later. When the phone stopped going face down, when she called his name from the other room and had to call it twice before he answered. She was tired. She was in her 2nd trimester, and her back ached and her feet swelled on long shifts. She told herself that she was the one who had changed, that pregnancy made everything feel louder and more urgent, that she was reading things into silences that were just silences. She told herself this with the kind of discipline that looks like trust from the outside. Her closest friend at work, a fellow nurse named Bridget, said something once, just once carefully, about how quiet Mara seemed. Mara said she was just tired. Bridget nodded and let it go because Bridget was a good friend, and good friends know when to wait. Mara was 26 weeks along when she found the receipt. It was a Saturday. She'd gone looking in Felix's jacket pocket for the parking stub she needed to validate. Because he'd taken her car the day before and left his jacket on the hook by the door. The receipt was from a restaurant she'd never heard of, dated a Tuesday night 3 weeks earlier. A Tuesday when Felix had told her he had a client dinner in Naperville. 2 people, steak, a bottle of wine that cost more than their first date. She stood in the hallway for a long time. Then she put the receipt back in his pocket. She validated her parking stub with a different method. She didn't say anything. She spent the next week moving through their apartment like someone diffusing something. She watched him pour her orange juice in the morning and thought, tell me I'm wrong. She watched him sleep and thought, tell me this means nothing. She didn't ask, because asking meant the answer might be real, and she wasn't ready for real. She had 26 weeks worth of real growing inside her, and she wasn't sure she had room for anything else. What finally broke her was something small. She'd been scheduled for her 28-week checkup on a Thursday afternoon. The anatomy scan, the one she'd been looking forward to. Felix had promised 3 weeks before that he would be there. It wasn't optional, he'd said. Put it in my calendar. I'll be there. He called her at noon that day. There was something in his voice she'd never heard before. A kind of flatness, like a man reading from a script he hasn't practiced enough. He had a showing, he said. A last-minute thing. A big client. He couldn't get out of it. He was so sorry. He'd make it up to her. He'd take her to dinner this weekend, anywhere she wanted. Mara sat in the parking garage of the medical building and looked at the ultrasound printout the technician had just handed her. Her daughter, 3 inches long, already with her fist near her mouth, and said, "Okay, Felix, no problem." She hung up and sat with the printout for a long time. Then she drove to his office. She wasn't going to make a scene. She wasn't even sure what she was going to say. She just needed to see him, needed to stand in front of the man who was supposed to be at that appointment and look at his face and know one way or the other. She parked on the street outside the building on Meridian and sat there for a few minutes, working up whatever she needed to walk inside. And that's when she saw them. Felix came out the front entrance. He wasn't alone. The woman beside him was pregnant, visibly, unmistakably pregnant, maybe as far along as Mara herself, maybe a few weeks behind. Felix had his hand on her lower back. He was saying something to her and she was nodding, and his face had an expression Mara had not seen on him in months. Focused, present, attentive. The woman laughed. Felix smiled. Mara did not get out of the car. She sat absolutely still, hands on the wheel, and watched Felix open the passenger door of his car and help the woman in. The same way he'd helped Mara into cars. The same hand, the same gesture, the same particular care. She watched him walk around to the driver's side and get in. She watched the car pull out and turn left. Then she looked down at the ultrasound printout in her lap. She doesn't fully remember the drive home. She remembers the printout was still in her hand when she unlocked the apartment door. She remembers sitting on the floor of the hallway, back against the wall, not because she'd decided to sit there, but because her legs had simply stopped working. She looked at her daughter's face on that small, grainy piece of paper, and she thought, "What did I do?" And then she thought, "This is not what you did," and then she didn't think anything for a while. She called her mom. Deb answered on the second ring the way she always did, and Mara said, "Mom," and Deb said, "I'm on my way," before Mara had said another word. Deb arrived with Carl 20 minutes later. Mara was still on the floor. Her dad sat down on the floor beside her without a word and put his arm around her shoulders, this man who had spent her whole childhood being bad at feelings, and she leaned into him and let herself come apart in a way she'd been holding back for weeks. Her mom made tea. Her mom always made tea, as though hot water and leaves could do something for a broken thing. And maybe they couldn't, but there was something about the ritual of it that helped. Mara told them what she had seen. She told them about the receipt. She told them about the appointment Felix hadn't come to. Her dad's face went through several expressions before settling into a stillness that was worse than anger. "You're not going back there tonight," her mom said. "Mom, you're not. Pack a bag. You can figure everything else out later. Tonight you're not alone." Mara went back to her apartment the following morning to get more clothes. Felix was there. He looked like he hadn't slept. He started talking before she'd even closed the door. Explanations, context, nothing that was quite an apology. The kind of talking that is really just a person trying to get ahead of the truth. Mara stood in their kitchen and listened and looked at him, this man she had trusted with everything, and felt something settle in her with a finality that surprised her. "How long?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. 8 months. She did the math without wanting to. The week she'd told him she was pregnant, he'd already been with someone else for 5 months. She asked him to leave. He did not fight her on it. Maybe he'd known, somewhere underneath the talking, that there was nothing left to negotiate. He packed a bag and he left. And Mara stood in the apartment and thought about the peach cobbler and her mother's attic full of baby clothes, and all the small things she had collected as evidence, and understood that evidence was not the same as the truth. Her hospital was a 20-minute drive from her parents' house, and for the next several weeks she made that drive twice a day. Home to the hospital, hospital to home, her parents' house on Clearfield Avenue, her childhood bedroom with the slanted ceiling, and the window that looked out over the backyard where she'd grown up. It was strange to be 31 and sleeping in that room again. It was also the only place she felt safe. She'd worked at St. Clair Regional for 6 years. She knew every corridor, every supply closet, every code for every door. She knew which vending machine gave you 2 bags if you hit the button a certain way. She knew her patients, and she knew the doctors and nurses who moved through those halls, and she'd always been good at the job. Not just technically good, but the kind of good that matters in labor and delivery, which is the emotional kind, the being present kind, the knowing when to hold someone's hand kind. She threw herself into it, 32 weeks pregnant, and she was working doubles when the unit was short-staffed, training the new orientees, reorganizing the supply room that no one had touched in 2 years. Her supervisor, Kathleen, pulled her aside once and said gently that she didn't have to save the whole floor. Mara said she knew. She kept working. It was on a Thursday, exactly 4 weeks after the parking garage, that she met Owen. She'd seen him before. He was an attending in maternal fetal medicine, the high-risk side of the floor. She knew his name from the schedule board and from the way people talked about him. Competent, exact, not prone to small talk, the kind of doctor who was precise about everything and warm about nothing. She'd formed an impression without ever having a real conversation with him, the way you do with people you work around but not with. That Thursday, she was stocking the supply room on the 3rd floor when she heard someone in the hallway say her name. Not directed at her, just passing information. She caught the word 32 weeks and patient and Felix's name and stopped moving entirely. She stepped into the hall. The nurse at the station was talking to Owen. She wasn't sure what expression was on her face, but something in it made Owen look up. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said quietly to the nurse, "I'll be right back." And he walked over to Mara. "You look like you need to sit down," he said. "I'm fine." That wasn't a question. He wasn't unkind about it. He just said it the way you say things when you've spent years working with people in crisis and you know what the edge looks like. He walked her to the small break room at the end of the hall and brought her a cup of water and sat across from her while she pulled herself back together. She didn't know why she told him. She wasn't a person who told people things easily, especially not people she barely knew, especially not at work. But something about the way he waited, not filling the silence, not performing concern, made the words come out. She told him about Felix, about the woman, about the apartment and her parents' house, and the ultrasound printout she still kept in her bag. Owen listened. He didn't say anything until she'd finished, and then he said, "You're still here. You kept showing up. That matters more than you think it does right now." It wasn't a grand statement. It wasn't the kind of thing that fixed anything, but she held on to it for reasons she didn't examine too closely. Over the following weeks, they became something. She was not sure at first what to call it. Not friends exactly, not yet, but something that was building toward something. He checked on her, without making it obvious he was checking on her. He remembered things she'd mentioned in passing. He was not, she noticed, the way she'd heard him described. He was not cold. He was just careful. Careful with what he said, with what he promised, with what he gave. She started to understand that there was a difference between warmth that was easy and warmth that had been chosen deliberately. The week she hit 36 weeks, she found out that Felix's girlfriend, the other woman, the other pregnancy, had lost her baby. Bridget told her, not as gossip but carefully, because Bridget knew Mara would want to know rather than be blindsided. The woman's name was Alessandra. She'd been 30 weeks along. Mara sat with that information for a long time. She didn't feel what she might have expected to feel. She felt something closer to grief, not for Felix, not for any version of the story that involved her being wrong about him, but for a woman she had never met, who had been lied to as thoroughly as Mara had been lied to, and who was now carrying that loss. She thought about what it meant to be betrayed by the same man. She thought about Alessandra in some apartment somewhere, alone with the thing Felix had done. And then she did something her mother said was crazy and her father said was brave. She found out which hospital Alessandra was recovering at through a mutual colleague who knew them both professionally. She didn't call ahead. She just went on a Tuesday afternoon with a card she'd bought at the CVS on Hampton Road and wasn't sure she was going to give, just held in her hands. She sat in the hospital parking lot for 15 minutes. Then she went inside. She had not known what to expect, certainly not what she got. Alessandra was sitting up in the hospital bed with the expression of a woman who had been cried out and was now just tired. She was small and dark-haired and looked about Mara's age, and when Mara walked in, she looked at Mara's stomach, and then at her face, and something passed between them that Mara couldn't have put into words. "You're her," Alessandra said. "Yes," Mara said. There was a long pause. "Did he tell you?" Alessandra asked. "About me?" "No," Mara said. "I found out on my own." Alessandra looked out the window. "He told me you were separated. He said the pregnancy was, he said it wasn't what it looked like." She exhaled. "I should have known. I think I did know, and I let him tell me otherwise." "That's not your fault," Mara said. "He's good at that." They were quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about the baby," Mara said. Alessandra nodded. She looked at Mara's stomach again. "How much longer?" 4 weeks, maybe 3. Alessandra nodded again and didn't say anything, and Mara sat with her for a while. Not saying much, not having to, just being present in the way that Mara had spent 6 years learning to be present with women in hard rooms. She left the card. She left her number. She didn't expect to hear from Alessandra again. She was wrong about that. She went into labor on a Sunday morning, 3 weeks before her due date. Her mother drove her. The car ride was 22 minutes and Deb talked the entire way, a steady stream of everything and nothing, the kind of talking that is really just a person saying, I am here, I am here, I am here. Mara held the door handle and breathed through contractions and thought about how it is possible to be terrified and ready at the same time. She had requested not to be on the floor where she worked. She wanted to be just a patient, not a colleague, not someone people knew. She was taken to the 4th floor, which was quieter, and put in a room with a window that looked out over the parking lot, which was not scenic, but was something to focus on. She was 5 centimeters when Owen appeared in the doorway. She looked at him. Kathleen called me, he said. She thought you might want a familiar face. I can leave if you want me to. She looked at him for a moment longer. Stay, she said. He stayed. He stood to the side and did not get in the way of the nurses and the midwife and her mother. But he was there. Through the long middle hours, the hard ones, the ones where she stopped being able to think in full sentences and just existed inside the work of it. When she reached for something to hold, it was his hand she found. Her daughter was born at 4:47 in the afternoon. She cried the moment she was placed on Mara's chest, a real, furious, indignant sound, and Mara felt every version of the last year. The hope, the deception, the grief, the floor of the hallway, the parking garage, all of it compress into a single point and then dissolve. Her daughter had dark eyes. Her daughter had Mara's nose and Carl's ears and a mouth that was entirely her own. Hi, Mara said. Hi. I've been waiting for you. Her mom was crying. Mara was crying. Owen, to his obvious embarrassment, was blinking very rapidly at the window. Mara named her daughter June. Felix signed the birth certificate at Mara's attorney's request, and otherwise removed himself from the situation with a thoroughness that might have looked like indifference, but which Mara chose to read as, at least, a final honest act. The acknowledgement that there was nothing left here for him to take. Her parents retired early and moved 30 minutes closer, into the house on Whitfield Road, with the backyard big enough for Kid to run in. Her dad built June a porch swing the summer she was old enough to sit up on her own. Her mom came over on Sunday mornings and made pancakes, and let June make a mess of the batter the way grandmothers do. Owen asked Mara to dinner 4 months after June was born. Formally, like it mattered to him to ask correctly. She said yes. He showed up with flowers for her and a small stuffed elephant for June. And later, much later, when June was old enough to have opinions about such things, she would claim the elephant had been the most important part. They were careful with each other. Careful in the way of two people who had learned something about what carelessness costs, who had chosen, independently and then together, to be precise about what they offered and honest about what they needed. It was not dramatic. It did not have the electricity of a beginning she'd once thought she wanted. It had something better, the feeling of being known accurately, of being seen without performance or pretense, of having someone say, I am choosing this deliberately every day. Alessandra texted Mara on June's first birthday. Just 2 words, happy birthday, and then a small red heart. Mara sent back a photo of June with frosting on her nose. It was not a friendship, exactly. But it was something. An understanding between 2 women who had been handed the same story from different angles, who had both walked out the other side of it carrying different things, who had each, in their own way, put themselves back together. There is a photo Mara keeps on the dresser in the bedroom she shares with Owen now, in the house on Alderton Street that they moved into the fall. June turned 2. It is not a glamorous photo. It was taken on a Sunday morning in her parents' kitchen, the light coming in through the window over the sink. In that particular way, it only comes in at certain hours. June is in the high chair with maple syrup on her chin, looking at something off camera with an expression of complete absorption. Mara is beside her, not looking at the camera either, looking at her daughter. Mara does not look the way she looked the morning she burned the eggs. She looks older, quieter, settled into herself in a way that wasn't there before. She looks like a woman who went through something and decided to keep going. That is the word she comes back to when she thinks about everything. Not healed. That's a word that sounds too final, too clean. The word she comes back to is continuing. She is continuing. June is continuing. The life she is building is continuing. One ordinary morning at a time. The maple syrup and the bad parking lots and the small stuffed elephant on the bookshelf. And the man who turns his phone face down when they eat dinner together. Every time, without being asked. She doesn't need evidence anymore. She has the real thing.